Let's go to our Abuja studios where engineer Mansour Ahmed, who is the president of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, MAN, and the interim chairman of the Pan-African Manufacturers Association, PAMA, joins us via our studios there in Abuja. Engineer Mansour Ahmed, thank you for your time this evening. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
The manufacturing sector, as that report, of course, clearly shows, has been very badly hit by this, shut for quite a long time and just slowly reopening. But the economic indices are not friendly at all. How have manufacturers been coping under the new normal, if you like?
Well, thank you very much. As your reporter has already pointed out, except for those sectors or subsectors of the manufacturing sector that were encouraged to stay afloat, like the pharmaceutical sector and some of the food and beverages sector, most of the other sectors have actually had it very difficult because the lockdown has completely stopped production in most of these sectors. So clearly the impact of COVID has been massive on the manufacturing sector. You also would be aware that the sector had not, even before COVID, had not been really as healthy as it ought to be. We were just perhaps coming out of, getting out of the low levels of performance in the fourth quarter of 2019. And then, of course, we're hit by COVID. And of course, apart from COVID, we also had some other key issues like the massive decline in foreign exchange arising from the fall in oil prices. So many of the problems of the sector were already there, and COVID has simply made it worse. Apart from the impact on the production itself, obviously there has been some significant disruption of supply chains for all the sectors, including the pharmaceutical sector. That sector, for instance, depends significantly on imported materials for its operations, particularly the active pharmaceutical ingredients, most of which were being imported either from China or India. And we know that both countries had actually suspended export of some of these materials even before COVID hit us here. So that actually compounded the problem. But again, the disruptions has not only been in terms of imports, but also even in terms of supply of materials within the country. As you are aware, the lockdown and the suspension of interstate transfers has meant significant problems for manufacturers who rely on transport of inputs such as raw materials and spare parts from one part of the country to another. Particularly those relying on agricultural inputs that obviously were also affected, apart from COVID, by especially the security situation in the country. So indeed, the sector has not fared very well. And indeed, as your reporter has highlighted, our CEO confidence index between Q4 in 2019 and first quarter this year showed a significant decline from about 51.9% to just around 44%. So clearly the sector has not fared very well.
Now, there is something to be said that about what you talked about, the significant disruptions, but government has put in place what it called some interventions that are supposed to help the manufacturers. There's a 50 billion MSMEs fund, which the CBN is moderating its use for the specific purpose of the industry. There's another 15 billion, which is targeted at a number of specific sectors for intervention. So I want to ask, have these funds now been made available, or the methods of accessing them been made available to the manufacturers for the purpose of revamping or rescaling up their businesses?
Yes, we must accept and admit that both the CBN and the federal government have shown clear understanding. Apart from the 50 billion fund for the small and medium enterprises that has been put aside by the CBN, we also had a 1 trillion naira fund that is being proposed by CBN for all manufacturers. And there's another 100 billion naira for pharmaceutical manufacturers in particular. These funds have been available, and I understand from some of our members have started accessing them, but the complaints we receive is that the access to these funds is not as easy and as fast as it ought to be. So we do hope that going forward, both the CBN and the federal government will expedite the availability of these funds so that manufacturers can start to use them properly. Apart from the CBN facilities, the government's economic sustainability plan has also indicated an intention to make available significant funds to help the sector in various ways. Particularly this, we hope, will be targeted towards the development of local raw materials, the backward integration programs of many of our subsectors, and indeed the development of local content generally. So yes, the government is doing as much as it can. We know there are constraints, obviously, because government's own funding situation has changed and declined significantly. But of course, government has, of course, resorted to borrowing to fill the gap. I believe that what is important in this regard is to make sure that we put in place proper structures for delivery, for implementation of these plans, and particularly to ensure that the funds are actually reach the targets they are meant to assist. And I think if this is done, then there's a chance that we may just be able to avoid a deep depression, because as we have seen, the economy even before COVID was obviously tottering. We just in fact started to see a comeback, as it were, when in the fourth quarter we saw the GDP going to about 2.3% or 2.6%, but clearly the situation has now changed. The projection even by the Bureau of Statistics shows that we should expect significant decline, contraction in the economy during this year. Even I think the Economic Sustainability Committee has alluded to the fact that unless significant action is taken in terms of making funds available into the economy, injecting funds in the economy in various sectors, we can actually fall back into recession. And I think this is something we must try and avoid, because clearly the economy is fragile. The manufacturing sector in particular is extremely fragile, and if we are not able to sustain its operation through the COVID period and enable it to survive COVID, subsequent growth may be extremely slow, and we may have a longer period of recovery than we expect.
I have just enough time to ask you one final question. Before you came on, I was talking to a public health physician who identified some of the key things that needed to be done for factories and assembly lines and so on, for manufacturers to ensure that they don't end up with infected workers in their various premises. Are you aware of any action that the manufacturers individually or as a group are taking to implement this already, even as they access all these other facilities and all these other plans for help? Are they doing things in the health sphere to ensure that their workers are safe?
Indeed. Indeed, right from the beginning, I think about February or early March, the Manufacturer Association of Nigeria issued guidelines and directives to all its members to ensure that every factory that remains open does comply with the NCDC regulations and ensures that it makes available facilities for hand washing, facilities, sanitizers, and for social distancing. And I believe that the CDC itself and many other state governments have issued very clear guidelines in terms of how many people should be able to work in a particular location. Factories were asked to reduce the number of people going into the workplaces to about 60%, and in some cases less, and there shouldn't be any congregation even at the workplace. So clearly, most of our members have been complying with these regulations. Obviously, you find one or two that may have sort of veered away from this, but we are watching, we are monitoring constantly and ensuring that our members comply with the regulations, because the health of our employees is very, very important to us.
Thank you very much, Engineer Mansour Ahmed. Thank you very much for your perspective on this. Engineer Ahmed is the president of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, as well as interim chairman of the Pan-African Manufacturers Association. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you.